Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nate Crespo, your host for today and forever, and welcome back to another episode of the Lawyers in the Making podcast, where it is my job to focus on the unique journeys to the law and law school of professionals in the legal field and law students. But let's talk about what we're doing today, because today we have another spectacular guest. She's an Emory University School of Law graduate and currently works as the founder and CEO at How to Contract. She has held past positions as a managing attorney at Frederick Law and as a senior commercial counsel at Tesla. I'm excited to have her on the podcast today. Mrs. Laura Frederick, welcome to the podcast. How are we doing today? Before going any further, I'd like to say a quick word about the sponsor of this podcast, Frederick. Back in episode 25, I had the privilege of having the CEO, Luke Yingling, on the podcast, and ever since that episode, fell in love with the product. Rhetoric takes user briefs and motions and compares them against the text of opinions written by judges to identify ways to tailor their arguments to better persuade the judges handling their cases. Rhetoric's focus on persuasion and helps users find new ways to improve their odds of success through more persuasive arguments. Know more, win more. I was able to see a demo of the product, and its cutting-edge technology and fascinating features make for a product I am proud to sponsor, and further shows the new digital era the field of law has been entering thus far on my journey doing this podcast. If you decide to book a demo, let them know Nate sent you. Be sure to check them out in the show notes below or at userhetoric.com. One word, userhetoric.com. Now, back to the show.
We're doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem, Laura. I'm super excited for this episode, especially because you work for Tesla, and I will get to my obsession soon enough. I will tell you all about it. But before we get started, Laura, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I was a lifetime lawyer, spent 25 plus years working in corporations and law firms, doing commercial and technology deals. And then about 5 years ago, I quit and started working for myself as open my own practice. And along the way, during the pandemic, I started posting contract tips on LinkedIn. And I took a challenge to post one every day for 30 days. And I thought, no way I could do that. That's maybe 10 days I could do that. And I continued daily. I think I have to figure out the exact date, but it was like 1,380 days later. I moved from 7 days a week to 5 days a week. So that's kind of how I started and came into the public world of contracting. But I've done it in my whole life. I love contracts. It's so much fun. There's so much joy there. People who get overwhelmed by it, I'm like, let me talk to you for a little while. I'll explain why they're so fun and help you see the joy of drafting and negotiating contracts. It's not something to be intimidated by. It's really something that, really appeals, especially us nerdy word people, that you can really kind of indulge that nerdiness and get into the strategy of this word versus that word. So I love it.
Oh, of course. I love the world of semantics. It's a beautiful place. I learn about it in my philosophy classes all the time. There's so much that goes into it. But let's go all the way back. Wonderful year, 1990. What a year it was for everyone except me. I wasn't there. But you were at the George Washington University. You graduated there in 1990. And then that same year, you ended up at Emory University School of Law. So, Laura, simply put, why'd you go to law school?
I didn't like math. I'm one of those people. It actually was that simple. I didn't like math and I wanted to keep going in my schooling because I really enjoyed school and I knew, but it wasn't just enjoying school. It was, I knew that I could achieve more in my life with an advanced degree than I could with a bachelor's. So I made that decision. I was international economics undergraduate. So I looked at an MBA, a master's in economics, or law school. And economics and an MBA both required a lot of math. So by default, I chose law school, thinking I'd never practice law. I would just get the degree and then go do something else with it. But I'd never even known a lawyer in my entire life. I'd thought that you had to be really smart to go to law school. And I remember freshman year, I was at George Washington, and freshman year, and I'm getting to law school. And again, me, little 18-year-old me, thinks I'm not smart enough. And I remember talking to a bunch of people my freshman year, and the whole group of them were talking about going to law school. And all I could think was, "Oh, well, I'm at least as smart as they are. I could do this." And it really opened my eyes to this crazy high standard I set in the world that only the super smartest of us can go to law school. And that's not the case. It's really, yeah, it helps to be very good at academics, very good at retention and thought processing, but you don't have to be a genius to go to law school, as we all know.
Well, I know that more than anyone because I've talked to many, many lawyers, many, many professionals, many, many law students, and all of them equally have said the same thing that pretty much anyone can get into law school and have a good time and actually succeed and excel in law school. Now, we love talking about the first year, and I just have to say, I love how interesting it is the fact that before you even got to law school, you're thinking, oh, I'm never going to use this degree. I'm never even going to be a lawyer. And I'd love to find out what changed your mind through all that processes, and let's get into it. So, first year of law school, people love it, people hate it, but how was it for you?
I pretty much hated it. It was terrible. I did not, I'm the way my memory works, reading a case and then having to talk in the class, I don't process information that well. I can't remember case names to save my life. If you held a gun to my head and said, Laura, I'm going to read you three case names, and in 20 minutes you have to remember all of them, just shoot me now. Like it's just not going to happen. And so it was terrible because you kind of have to know the cases when you're in law school classes. So that was hard. And then it was just very anxiety ridden to have people calling me randomly, no matter how prepped I was. It was just very, I was very anxious about it. So I didn't love it. I'm
So,
in that camp.
so going through, you disliked law school, but you found some love in it at the same time because you eventually decided to actually become an attorney. So, were there any specific experiences through your law school experience that led you to be like, okay, I actually want to be a practicing attorney. I want to do this legal thing?
Yeah, I almost want to say no because back I graduated law school in 93 and there really weren't the options for lawyers out of law school. It was kind of like we got duped. Future generations get duped other ways with law school, but we got duped with this idea that we could graduate law school and be anything we wanted. Well, back in those years, you could, but after you'd practiced 3 or 4 years. It was really hard to get a job out of law school doing something else because employers just assumed, well, either you're stupid and you went to law school and don't want to do it, or, you don't know yourself and you're just, whatever it was. So yeah, I kind of had to go, or at least that was the thinking at the time, was I had invested so much time and money, I had to become a lawyer. So I was very interested in international and held out. I wanted to do something with international as a lawyer, and started in the world of international franchising. The only job I could get. And that was international at the time, this was by the time this happened, it was 94. And yeah, I just got that. And it happened to be international franchising, which involved contracts. And that was my first exposure to that part of the world and enjoyed that from the beginning.
So you became a law clerk at Abraham Pressman and Bauer. And did this begin sort of your love for contracts, the art form of contracts? Now, I always name something I love, something that I love. And not only do I love it, I love the intricacies of it. So it instantly, in my mind, becomes an art form because it could be perfected, it could be improved over time. It's a beautiful thing. But is this where your love started at this law clerkship? And can you tell us a little bit about your experience there?
Yeah. Well, that was a job. It was funny because, as I said, I wanted to do international. I was committed. I was like, I'm going to get the job. It was a terrible downturn in the market back then. And I came out, I actually did a Fulbright grant for a year after law school up in Canada. I come to DC thinking the whole world was my oysters. I graduated top 15% in a top 20 school. It was like everybody's going to be hitting me up for job to offer me jobs. I couldn't get a job. no matter what. So I ended up actually 4 months. I worked on a government hotline. This is as a license. I'd already been licensed. I'm an attorney. I'm a Fulbright scholar, and I'm working on a government hotline phone bank, answering questions about a government auction for about 4 months with high school grads, stay-at-home moms, all that. So I did that for 4 months, and then this law clerk job was the only one I could get to hire me that was even legal. And so it was great, though. Wonderful people. I had a great time, learned a little bit, but it was a mix. It was very rigid in the way that franchise agreements are. They're very formulaic. There's not as much creativity that goes into them. There's a heavy regulatory overlay on top of them. So it was fine. I did enjoy it, but it wasn't anything that made me jump up and down excited. It wasn't until I got to my next job, well, two jobs later, when I started doing technology transactions, that I totally fell in love. And that really was the best. It fit me so well because it was so flexible, so much creativity that went into it, so much intellectual challenge, because this was even before the dot-com boom. This was in the early days before that. So it was kind of tech transactions before text transactions were cool. But I just loved it.
Back when IBM ruled the world and it wasn't the Apples and Googles of the world. Now, you were an associate of technology transactions from 2000 to 2005, and you also spent two different years. You were 1 year in Singapore, and the other year you were in Hong Kong. Now, we could skip the two previous jobs because I want to get to the meat and potatoes here. I want to see where this love for contracts, because you got me interested. I'm hooked. So I want to hear about the creativity that goes into it. What is so special about contracts to you? And can you sort of frame it through the experiences you had at technology or as an associate of technology transactions for those 5 years?
Yeah. So the thing I love about it, one is the creativity. And two, because you're writing, you're creating these stories, because a contract is essentially a business story. You start with two characters, those are the parties, you have recitals, which kind of talk about the backdrop of the story. And then you start getting into what they're going to do and what they can do. And then as the contract progresses, you get into money and disputes and what if everything blows up and all the terrible things that can happen. So I love just creating this framework of everything that's going to work, thinking outside the box, thinking creatively about all the what ifs. And then there's the strategy, because it's not just me writing a story. I have to agree upon the story with somebody else. And they have their own interests and own perspective. So essentially, we're writing this story together, and each of us are it's a push me, pull you, back and forth of trying to get a story that is that I want to tell. They're trying to get the story in their favor. So it's that kind of gamesmanship to it. And then there's also just the pure writing. One of the things I love about contracts you don't get as much in other practice areas is we can be wrong all the time. Like there's never a perfect contract. I don't believe it exists on this planet. I don't believe it's ever been written. There are always ways to improve. And especially when you're working fast and without a lot of time, like most contract lawyers do now, you are imperfect and you should be. You shouldn't have a perfect contract. When you're an in-house contract manager, contract lawyer, you have 20 contracts that you have to have done by the end of the week, and each one really needs 10 hours. So what do? You triage. I call it like the ER doctor, where you just kind of put a band-aid on this guy, but you send this one up to a surgery. This one you spend 4 hours on, but you spend 10 minutes with everybody else. That's what the life is of an in-house contract lawyer. And that to me was so fun because it's very much thinking on your feet, responding to the situation, but also very focused on what the business needs, business priorities and objectives. It's not just Laura thinking out loud on random indemnification theory and case law. It's okay, what's the minimum we need from this counterparty and this provision to do this deal? Is the risk of me getting a bad provision worse than not doing the deal at all? And so you're working with the business team to make those assessments. So much fun. every day. I just have loved it ever since I started tech transactions as when did whatever that was, 95, or yeah, right around 96, 97. I think I started that. I, I've loved it ever since. And so, yeah, I could go on for days.
I mean, listen, I can already tell you go on today. I can feel the excitement coming through the screen right now of you talking about contracts. Now, you've piqued my interest, so I have to ask, what is like an example of you thinking out the box in terms of writing a contract? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is trying to come up with wording that the other side will agree to, but without hitting them on the head with it. So, for example, one of the ways is there's the indemnification provision, which is when you reimburse the other side if somebody sues them because of really something you're responsible for. There's a lot of, in business world, a lot of people expect that to be mutual. And so one of the ways I think outside the box, and one of my techniques, share this a lot with people so they know about it, which is I make it mutual, but the standard I point to each party will indemnify each other for the any breach of warranty. So it looks mutual. But then if you go to the warranty section, that's one-sided. So it's a creative way to have a provision that's more in my client's favor. I'm not lying about it. I'm not trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. I'm just drafting my contract in a way that favors my client. The other side's represented by a lawyer. They can make revisions all they want and try and change it. And ultimately, they can choose not to sign the deal because of what is in there. But that's one of my creative ways to think outside the box and structure. And that's that strategy and gamesmanship that we always do with contracting.
Yeah, it seems to be a sort of a battle using a lot of your intellectual sort of, inquisitive nature, using all of that. It reminds me of poker. Now, I'm no expert at poker. I lose a lot of money all the time. But it reminds me very much of poker in terms of, making sure you're putting yourself in the right place that you can win, or, they might call your bluff. They might look into that and be like, "Oh, look, I see what she's doing. It's a one-sided thing. Now we have to make these changes. Now you have to make a counter change." So there's so much that goes into it, and I'm fascinated by the whole contract thing right now. You're getting me. Now, after your time as an associate of technology transactions, you became the senior counsel at PPL Corporation for 5 years. So can you talk about that experience? How was it?
Yeah, I had such a great time. I worked in big law, massive hours, the kind of traditional 70-hour a week kind of job. And I started having kids. By the time I was pregnant with my third, I was like, okay, I'm done. And I found this job. I was like, I want a regular job, bricks and mortar, show up, go home. That's what I was looking for. So this was that. It was at an energy company in Pennsylvania that had utilities. It had a propane company, had nuclear power. It had everything. So I joined to do supply chain contracts, relatively low level. That's what I expected to do. I told people I retired because I had 3 kids at home and soon had a fourth. And but very quickly, about after a year, my boss left. And so I had to step in 2006 and take over a lot of his work. And he supported our commodity and financial trading operations that did deals for derivative contracts with Lehman Brothers, with all Bear Stearns, with JP Morgan, with all the big guys. So I was a lawyer on all of that starting in 2006. Well, you remember what happened in 2007, 8, the whole debacle and meltdown, and I was in the middle of all that. So much, well, I wasn't the cause of it, of course, but I was handling the contracts for my company. There was such a fear in those days that if I screwed up the contracts, if I screwed this whole thing up, the company would go down because companies were going down. They were going bankrupt. And if I screwed it up, all our, retirees with their pensions would lose them, so it was like the opposite of the hang out and retire kind of job. But it was thrilling. It was great. And it showed me a whole different world and a side of contracting that I hadn't seen before as a pure tech transactions lawyer, both from a physical commodities and buying and selling natural gas and uranium and things like that to the financial derivative contracts and learning all about hedging and things like that. It was a lot of fun.
So I have to ask, when in the midst of the market crashing to the absolute bottom, the worst recession and one of the worst recessions in American history, I have to ask, during that time when you're doing these financial derivatives with these big banks like the Lehman Brothers, which I knew got into a little bit of trouble, but when you're doing these contracts with those guys, were there any ways where like you'd send over the contract, they just sign it immediately and like move as quickly as they can? Like were they much more sporadic in what they were doing and weren't really like looking things over? This is more of just a personal interest question.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And I had no idea how contracting worked in that world. I had just been used to purchase orders for supply chain and sales and maybe doing these bigger contracts for distribution or partnerships or whatever. And I get there, it's actually incredibly automated. The way it works is you have two people, one from each side on a recorded line who strike a deal, kind of like when you're buying stocks. And they strike a deal and then they submit the ticket, it gets papered up. There is already a master agreement in place between the parties. So Lehman and PPL had a master agreement and which called an ISDA. It's a very standard agreement around the world. And it's so great because there's only a few changes that anybody ever makes to it, maybe, well, a few, 10 to 20, relatively speaking, but everybody agrees to operate off this one form. And then one side sends what they call a confirmation to the other side. So let's say Lehman, and I forget who it was, either the buyer or the seller always sends it. So one side sends it to the other side. We review it within 3 days and either say, no, you got the price wrong, you got this wrong, whatever it is. And the parties agree to go to the phone recording if there's any dispute. So there were 5 contract managers who worked with me. I rarely had to deal with the contracts themselves. I was there more for troubleshooting, for big, gnarly, messy situations. But the day-to-day contracting, it's actually the most efficient, least error-prone type of contracting I've ever seen in my career, just because it's so automated. We had risk management all over the place because these are, billion-dollar transactions going on, especially when you're talking about the trading derivatives and the change in value potential. And these were, especially energy companies, have longer term derivative kinds of contracts. So, yeah, it was like my tech transactions world. I often was the only lawyer who would ever see any contract. And hopefully I didn't screw it up, but whatever. It was like 7 layers of people looking at everything. And, so, the CFO's involved, the chief risk officer's involved, everybody's involved. So it was a very much had a ton of oversight. So very different from what I was used to. But it was fun. I enjoyed that part. But then eventually, I could have stayed in that practice area because it's a very much a niche, but I missed my tech transactions. So I went back to that.
And you did indeed go back to that. And I love the word arrow prone. I've never heard that word before, and now I'm taking it. So sorry. But you did come back, and you were the assistant general counsel at Amonix Incorporated for 2 years from 2010 to 2012. So how was that experience?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. It was a startup doing solar module manufacturing. And in California, we had moved out there. And, it was a small company. It went from about 60 people to about 150 at its peak, and then hit some troubles and everybody was fired. So it closed down as startups do. Well, eventually survived in some smaller form, but learned a lot from it, especially that I never wanted to work at a small company again as their in-house counsel because it was very hard for me. I'm a rule follower by nature and I want to follow rules and I want everybody to follow rules. And sometimes at the smaller companies, that's not the strength because they're scrappy and moving fast. So I discovered that I definitely wanted to be in a bigger, more a place with policies and consequences for not following policies. Put it that
Well,
way.
that's such a wonderful thing as well, because what I love to talk about on this podcast is finding out what you do want to do, which you did, contracts, but finding out what you don't want to do, and even down to sort of the microscopic level of your career that you decided, oh, I never want to touch the startup world again, none of the small companies ever again, because it's just something you don't want to do. So you can narrow down your options, and you indeed did. You found yourself as the senior commercial counsel at Hanwha Q Cells America. I have to ask, what is that?
So it was a combination company. Hanwha is a very big, one of the top 10 Korean conglomerates and they're involved in everything. And then Q Cells was a German solar module maker. And then they combined with that with another company. They took three companies, an American Southern California company, merged them together. And you can imagine the German, Korean, and Southern California vibe mixing together. So that company, I did all they did solar module manufacturing and sales and distribution, but they also did a lot of the construction work for solar projects. So I had done some of that over the years, but I got into that a lot more. Yeah, it was great. I enjoyed it. And I'll say, when I was looking for that job, I actually interviewed for some general counsel positions at the time. Not that I wanted to be like a complete general counsel because they have to do employment and corporate and all that stuff, but I was hoping I could find a job where I could do mostly contracts. And I remember interviewing at one point, and the guy was telling me, he's like, yeah, this is mostly contract work, but we have a little bit of employment and a little bit of this, different regulatory things. And I remember just in the interview, like recoiling, like, ew, I don't want to, no, like I don't want to have to do that. That would be terrible. Why can't I just do contracts? And it was actually a point in my career where I realized I'd never wanted to be general counsel of anything because I would have to do things other than just draft and negotiate contracts. And I knew that I would never be as happy as I would be in a job that was just contracts.
Contracts are nothing for Laura, and
Yeah.
I love to hear that. Listen, you got your niche, you love what you love. You have your things, and you like to have them, and it's a wonderful thing. Now you then push forward into the solar panel world, all the solar panel modules. I don't even know what that is, but it's an interesting word. I like
It's
saying
like
it.
the TV, it's the TV screen, like you go in the field and you see the solar farms that it's basically the thing that looks like a TV. That's the solar power module.
Well, but listen, the more you know, the more you know. Exactly. I'm learning new things. Now, you became the senior commercial counsel at Solar City for 2 years from 2015 to 2017. Now, were you doing just contracts there? I hope you were.
I was. Well, I was doing contracts, and what I consider as like a subset of contracts is the commercial relationships. So I draft and negotiate contracts, but then I was also in charge of operations. So if we had a vendor who was screwing up, whose product broke, who had consistent serial defects in their components or whatever, I would support that. And we had a lot of at Solar City, we did our own operations and maintenance of all the solar products out in the field. So I was the lawyer supporting those teams as well, which was great because it's that out of the box thinking commercially. How do I balance legal risk obligations with the business realities? And how can I help my team achieve their goals by using my knowledge and strategies? So yeah, I had a great time there.
And now we get to what I've been waiting for, and I could speak about my obsession. Now, Laura, I have this strange obsession. I am obsessed with the Cybertruck. I don't know why. I can't
Mm.
explain it. It looks like a warthog from Halo, if anyone out there knows what that is. But I am just absolutely obsessed. I swear, every time I see it out there on the road, there's a ton on Long Island where I'm from. So I always see them. I always take a picture. Every single time I take a picture. I'm just obsessed. I'm gonna get one eventually, but I'm just absolutely obsessed. Now, you were the senior commercial counsel at Tesla for 2 years. How was that experience? What went into that? How was working for Tesla? I need to know.
Yeah, it was fantastic. For me, it was fantastic. It was it suited me. The environment suited me. And this is back kind of the old Elon before the new Elon. I'll leave it at that. So I started out doing supply chain, just like I had done solar power modules. I worked on some supply chain stuff, including the new solar roof product. So I was doing a little bit of that. And then one day my boss said in a group meeting that the lawyer who used to handle the environmental commodities like zero emission vehicle credits was leaving, and who wasn't wanted to take on that work. And I raised my hand. I said, actually, I spent 3 years trading environmental commodity credits as part of the energy derivative, sales and marketing work I did at PPL. So I took that over, and I became the only lawyer that managed or worked with the team that did all the environmental commodity credits. And this was a lean period for Tesla where they were losing so much money, and we were their big profit center because they were making so much money on these zero emission vehicle credits. It was really funding the viability of the company. So it was so cool because I'm in the middle of that. I had a team, it wasn't my team. I worked and supported a team of about 5 people who are just phenomenal at their jobs, just off the charts, amazing. And I found that at Tesla across the board. Every single person I worked at with, what their skill set was just off the charts. And I'd never seen that before in a company where usually there was a mix of some really good folks, some really bad folks, and a lot in the middle. And this company just had nothing but amazing folks, which is part of the cutthroat kind of firing approach they take, which is we regularly lay people off and you don't have a job for life. If you want a job for life, go work somewhere else. This is a meritocracy. You have a job as long as you're amazing and we need you. If you stop being amazing or we stop needing you, you don't have a job here. And so you kind of knew that going in and you had to be okay with that and accept that's where you were. But for me, the benefit was I got to work with these amazing people, cutting edge stuff with a lot of autonomy to kind of do my work as it needed to be done. You hear Elon talk about kind of the flat structure of the company. And it was totally true that he always said, if there's one person in the company that can help you solve a problem fast, you are required to go talk to them. Don't go through my boss and my boss asks their boss and that boss asks this guy. And then, it's like none of that. It was just none of the drama that comes with normal, especially bigger companies. And it was just, let's do great work together and achieve these things. And I loved it. It was my favorite job in my whole career.
Wow, I mean that just sounds like an absolutely fantastic experience that you had. And I mean, listen, they made the Cybertruck. So I'm not surprised that they are working in that kind of fashion and they are high efficiency people that get stuff done. And I love to hear that. Did you ever get to meet Elon or were you ever on like a video call? No, nothing like that.
No, the closest I got was I was in a room when somebody was talking to him on the phone. So, but actually it was one of the things where there were a lot of us. I mean, Elon tended to keep a smaller circle, unless he was on the floor and needed to work with people, whoever. So it was actually better because I think Elon has exacting standards. I'll just say it nicely that way. And there was always a fear that if you got into the little inner circle, you were much more exposed, and your job was much more exposed. So I was happy not to be in that little circle because at the end of the day, I just want to do contracts and have fun with my contracts. So I was happy.
Well, that's beautiful. Listen, being happy, doing the stuff that you love is the perfect life that anyone, closest to perfect. Obviously, no one's perfect, but the closest to perfect that anyone could have. Now, eventually, you left Tesla and went out on your own. You became the managing attorney at Frederick Law. Now, I love talking about people hanging their own shingle because there are great struggles that come with it. There are a lot you got to go through in order to open those doors up. So, can you tell us a little bit about that experience and how it was opening your own shop?
Yeah, it was. It was really, really tough because I'm a single mom. I've been raising the kids by myself since 2014. I've got 4 boys. And so I don't get, I didn't, wasn't getting any financial support from their dad. So it was just me and I don't have any family around. And I'm making it work as a single mom, working full time at a company like Tesla. I could do that. But I was looking for another job because it's, even though I love Tesla, it wasn't quite right, or it wasn't, there was something missing is probably a better way to say it. And I thought about it a lot. I did a lot of introspection about it. And I realized the thing that I was missing was freedom. That I'd spent my whole career kind of on call for everybody else in the world, doing their bidding when they want it, working with the people they assigned to me, on the projects they assigned to me. And I realized until I worked for myself, I wouldn't have that next level of happiness. And it's what it's all about. You're constantly moving towards more and more happiness. And I realized that's what I needed. So I had about 8 months of expenses in the bank total, other than my retirement. And I said, you know what? I'm going to bet on me because I know I can outwork anybody. I can get shit done, if I'm allowed to say that.
You absolutely
I'm
are.
I can, why, and I've never really totally failed at anything where I worked my ass off. So why would I fail at this? And so I decided to just jump off the cliff. And I thought, if I can't make it work, if I can't cover my expenses after 6 months, I'll just go find another job and I'll go whatever. So I did, but within a couple months, I was making way more than I had even made at Tesla or other jobs. And really had a lot of success because it gave me a chance to do what I love, but now had more control over the people I did it with. And I had a huge network of people because I'd been working 25 years at this point, or 20 whatever years. And so they were the source of a lot of referrals for me. So it was fantastic and I loved it.
So how was that feeling? Finally starting out on your own, opening your own shop. Obviously, it is, the yin and yang sort of thing. I have all this freedom, but it's all dependent on me that I have to do all the work. And of course, the best bet you could ever make is the bet on yourself because you know that you could fulfill it. You're the one doing it, of course. Now, how was that feeling? That visceral feeling, getting that freedom, being able to do what you wanted to do and work on the contracts that you wanted to do.
Yeah, it was fantastic. In the beginning, it was a little bit slow to come because in the beginning, I was feeling like watching the pennies and, so worried about, I got to get some work. I got to get some work. So I had some clients that weren't my favorite in the beginning, but I kept them. I ended up taking on some clients that, maybe weren't in my sweet spot, but I wanted to make sure I had that security of income. But it was, as soon as was able to get rid of my first client that wasn't in my sweet spot, that was the moment that I was like, this is why I did this. This is amazing. Because I'd worked in corporations forever and in law firms, and you don't get to choose who you work with. It's just by nature of who's assigned. So yeah, it was an amazing feeling. Still is, where I still have that freedom to work with people I want to work with and not work with those I don't. And it's one of my favorite things about my life.
Now, when you opened up shop, 2 years into opening up your own shop, you founded and became the CEO at How to Contract. Now, you are still currently the CEO there. So, what is How to Contract and what do you do there?
Yeah. So How to Contract is a training platform to teach lawyers and in-house contract teams how to do contracts. And it started because I spent my whole life, because I was super nerdy contract person, and I love learning about it. And I love getting into the intricacies of, okay, the no waiver provision in the boilerplate. I want to read like 100 things about it so I know every single thing about it, which in a way is to calm anxiety. That's what I've kind of learned, that my quest for knowledge was always because I thought I'd feel less anxious when I was doing negotiations if I knew everything there's to know. So I always dove deep, but it was very hard to find contract training as a professional, as a lawyer, that focused on kind of the real world in the trenches, what we do every day. It was all, let's talk about 6 recent developments in this type of law, or let's talk about licensing, and they'll just cover it at super high level. You have a licensor, you should consider various things when and I'm like, no, what are the 3 things I need to do? What if the counterparty says X, what do I do? Do I say yes? Do I say no? When do I decide whether that's okay, not okay? And nobody was explaining this to me. except some good mentors I had over the years. So I was lucky I had some good mentors early on, but then I was kind of on my own and figuring stuff out with a lot of research. So I always thought, when I get older and start kind of getting to the second half towards the end, the final third of my career, I wanted to make sure I documented everything I'd learned. So when in 2020 in the pandemic, I started posting these tips, as I mentioned before, and people loved them because it was just what I had talked about. It was practical, exactly what everybody who does contracts who's been doing them for a long time knows. It's kind of a common truth we all have, but nobody was talking about it. Nobody was writing them down. So I started with the tips. Everybody wanted them. So I published a book. Everybody's like, do training, do training. So I started doing training. I opened a membership where you could get ongoing training. I just kind of developed it that way. And I did it with my law firm for the first, I guess, 2 years. I did both. In the beginning, it was 90% law firm, 10% had a contract, and then slowly it increased, or the proportion changed until January 2024. No, we're in four. January 2023. So a year and a half ago, I stopped doing billable work. And ever since, I'm just out of contract because it's so much fun. I get to totally nerd out every day.
Was there any specific moment or any specific point in time where you woke up one day and you're like, all right, time to start posting on LinkedIn? What inspired you?
Yeah, it was really, it was the times. We were in the middle of the pandemic. It was the summer of 2020. I had a law firm. I had four contractor lawyers working for me, four of my clients. I'd done really well with referrals, but I wanted to start marketing more. And I'd been reading about thought leadership as a way to do marketing. And I thought, well, I know contracts pretty well, so I'll just start talking about that. And that way people will see that I know contracts and hire my law firm. So that was the thinking that went into it. And then, as I said, I ran across this post that said, do a 30-day challenge on LinkedIn, post every day for 30 days. And I started, and it was so much fun because I was relatively isolated, like we all were in those days. And I started connecting with people who would comment on my posts, and I want to say within just a few days, people were really attracted to the post. It was hitting a nerve because I was talking about, this is how you got to do this. And whenever this happens, I always make sure I do this. And then everybody would say, oh, yeah, and don't forget, you got to do this other thing. And then somebody else would say, you know what? This is what works for me. I do this approach. And it was this great supportive conversation, and I just love the tone and engagement. It wasn't anybody telling each other they were wrong, you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking about, only I have the right answer. It was a community of people who were helping each other learn. I mean, people would point out mistakes I was making, and they were like, you know what, Laura, I don't know if that's quite, and you're like, you're right. Thank you. It was great, very collaborative. And this contract community on LinkedIn has continued to thrive these 4 years, because it's almost coming up on 4 years ago that I started. And there is a group of people there that I know and have become incredible friends with. I meet regularly in person. I actually started Contracts Con, an annual in-person conference, so that we could all hang out together. Like, it's just a great community of people that I count on and enjoy, and it's changed my life.
Now, I would love to talk about Contract Con. Where did this idea come from? It is this year in Las Vegas, I saw. Now, what went into creating this and why did you create it in the first place?
Yeah, it really was in 2020 or 2021 we came up with it, or I came up with it as a way to kind of celebrate contracts. And the origination wasn't thinking anything more than there were a whole bunch of us who'd been talking every day on LinkedIn for a year and a half, or a year at this point. And we had started talking about trying to get together. The pandemic was kind of coming off the tail end. We thought this was that first summer of 21. We thought we were in the clear. Little did we know what the winter would hold. But so we were talking about meeting up someplace. And then I started talking to people and everybody wanted to meet up. And soon it became a group of like 30 people. And I'm like, well, that's going to be kind of hard. I should just make an event. We should do training. And I'm a ridiculous person by nature. So I love the idea of Contracts Con and making it fun and silly. For example, and I haven't mentioned it, my contract tips I post every day, it's always with a cartoon, with zombies, with cows, with aliens. It's just a ridiculous one scene kind of what I think of as Monty Python-esque humor. And so I made the Contracts Con the same way, where it was a lot of fun and silliness. So that was how it started. And the first one was in Miami in 2022. Well, the first one actually, no, the first one in 22 was online because it was that winter of, you know, terribleness when the pandemic came back. And then the second one was in Miami in 23. And then this past one was in Las Vegas in 24. And then January 25 is we're going to have the next one in Las Vegas.
Well, that sounds spectacular. So if anyone out there who loves contract, please take a look and make your way to Las Vegas for Contract Con this year because it sounds very exciting things going on. Now you, like you mentioned before, have a book, Practical Tips on How to Contract, Learn How to Draft and Negotiate from a former Big Law and Tesla commercial contracts lawyer. Now, you made a point in this book to not make it dry and just a bunch of words, and you probably put in a ton of your pictures. And as well, you talked about how to become a valued team member for any contracts. So, can you talk about the book and why you didn't want to make it so dry? Because I enjoyed that. That caught my eye.
Yeah, no, I if I had to sit down and write a book, I don't know if it ever happened. In theory, I have this idea that I can someday, but even a law review article, honestly, even a long form article, forget it. Like I just don't I have a lot in my head and I have a lot to say, but there's something about writing long form articles that is so unappealing to me at this point in my life. I just don't want to. So what I did was I took my contract tips because I really invested a lot of time every day in making those really great. So I would spend an hour and a half writing, a very short post, but I'd research sometimes, I'd redraft. I basically made it do everything I could to make it as clear as I could and the best writing I could. So I had all these individual, well written, well thought out, well researched posts. So what I did was I collected them all and I put them in a book. The first edition I published in November 2020 because people are like, can you give me a printout PDF and send it to me? And I was like, you know what? Amazon's got self-publishing. Try that. So, and that did well. And then I took the second book, so the first one had 91 tips because I'd only been posting for a couple months. This last one, the one out now, is 322 tips, and each one has one of my signature green single scene cartoons with crazy situations and stories and jokes. So yeah, I love the book now. I think people are really excited about it. I get a lot of great feedback, mostly from people who are like, either it's confirming what they already know, if they're more senior people, it's filling in gaps that maybe things they didn't learn about. And then it's also for people who aren't as advanced in their career. It's basically like the inside baseball. It's the inside insights into how we actually do things. It's not like contract law class in law school where it's offer, acceptance, consideration, mailbox rule, blah, 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 blah. Like all that stuff is mostly meaningless. I know the law school professors will hate me for it, but there's very little you need from law school contracts to do contracts in the real world. Some basic concepts, but really the day-to-day mechanisms of contract law and how the business is done of doing contracts is completely different. And that's what my book is really trying to get to explain that. It's also what my mom used to call the bathroom book, where it's one page at a time. And yeah, they're in a chapter by subject, but you could pick up and read any individual page at any time. So it stands alone. And so, yeah, I have people who tell me they keep it on their desk and every once in a while they'll look at it and they'll just flip through. Sometimes they'll flip through and just look at the cartoons and they don't even look at the rest of it.
Law students, are you feeling overwhelmed, stressed, or short on time in law school? Maybe you just want someone to show you a step-by-step framework to master the topics you're learning in your classes. I know the pressure you're under, and I've got the perfect solution for you. My course, The Law School Operating System, is proven to help you conquer law school with confidence and ease.
Created by Lisa Blasser, a former guest on the podcast and founder of the Law School Success Institute, this course breaks down every subject into manageable main topics that you run through a comprehensive study system to thoroughly prepare you for class and final exams. No more feeling like you need to know everything all at once in the beginning.
But that's not all, Nate. The Law School Operating System also teaches you how to schedule your studying and time effectively. For every topic, you'll know which study step you're on and when you'll complete it every week of your semester. No more mad dash cram sessions, more time with your loved ones. And with my system, you'll walk into your exams knowing you've given 100% of yourself, that there's nothing more you could have done to succeed, and there's no better confidence than that.
Lisa breaks it down like this: one class, one list of main topics, and one system to master each topic. With recorded and live sessions for students available on her website and partnerships with law schools nationwide, the Law School Operating System is here to help you thrive from day one to the final exam. Ready to take control of your law school journey and operate at your full potential in law school? Visit www.lisablaster.com today and enroll in the Law School Operating System. Be sure to use code LSOSNATE10 at checkout for 10% off the recorded course. That is code LSOSNATE10 at checkout. Now, back to the show. No, I think it's a wonderful thing that you put all the cartoons in the book because they, first of all, they need to be there. And second of all, people always come on here and talk about how important having that practical advice is. And sometimes, most of the time, law school does not exactly deliver on the practical real world advice. And you are sufficing in giving that to everyone through your book, through your post, through everything that you do. And for everyone wondering, it will be in the description below. You could check out all of Laura's work down there. Now, Laura, we are down to our last 5 questions here. The first of the 5 questions is something that I've been seeing throughout my entire journey doing this podcast, that the world is moving in a certain way. You know this more than anyone. You worked at Tesla. You worked at various other technology companies that are pushing forward in innovation. And there's all these new software technologies, these new AI technologies that people are using. So this is sort of the tech stack question per se. What does your tech stack look like, and what recommendations do you have for people for any technologies that you use?
Yeah, I think my biggest tech stack recommendation and the one that has made the biggest difference in my life is Canva. And I love Canva. I discovered it early on in 2020 because I started posting without an image, and then somebody's like, you got to post an image with your post to get it motion. So I've been doing it constantly since 2020. I am like the world's expert on Canva now. I do all my training, all my slide decks, everything I do, it's all in Canva. And I've become like graphic designs are my favorite things now. So Canva's my best tech stack suggestion.
I am actually a Canva Pro subscriber, so I know so much about Canva. I use it for everything, all of my promotional materials, everything that I use goes through Canva. It's such an amazing thing. And also, most importantly, if you don't have Canva Pro, all of your pictures and all the things that you download come out all grainy and it looks gross, but you can make, I don't even know what it would be considered, but there's that bar you click that makes it much more beautiful, crisp and clean. That's why I pay for it. I think it's such a wonderful product. I would suggest it myself as well, Laura. But fourth to last question here, live on the Lawyers in the Making podcast. Laura, what are your book recommendations for people? It doesn't have to be about the law, just some of your favorite books, something you give a gift to someone.
Yeah, there's one gift I've given to a lot of people, and it's called You Are a Badass. And you may have heard of it. And it's funny because somebody recommended to me, and I started reading, and I'm like, it's kind of written in this, the woman was in a punk band in the 80s or 90s or whatever it was, and she's not my voice, I'll say. But her message is so powerful in terms of our ability to do anything and our right to ask for what we want and expect it to happen and make it happen because we make it happen. And it was such an empowering message. And I've given it to so many people, and almost every single one or two don't like it, but almost everybody loves it in how it inspires. The thing that it's really, really good about, if people are listening, is learning to ask people to give you money, which is one of the hardest things as a solo practice. I'd never done it in my life. And suddenly I'm having to have people, I'm giving them a high hourly rate and expecting them to pay me. It's very almost like embarrassing. I don't want to ask for money. I don't want, it's hard. And the messaging in that book is really about you are helping them. You are letting them pay you by sharing and solving a problem for them. Like this is a gift to them to let them pay you. And it just changed my whole way of thinking. So I love that book and give it away all the time.
Yeah, that book has been previously recommended, but I've never heard it talked about in that light. From that perspective, that framework, I'm going to steal it because I think that's such a powerful message for people to hear. Now, third to last question here, Laura. What are the types of things that you consume, not food, consume on a daily basis, either that be through social media, so Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Substack, YouTube, Reddit, any podcasts that you listen to that you would recommend, any people on LinkedIn that you would recommend? What is crossing the transom of Laura's mind on a daily basis?
So I'll say I live mostly in LinkedIn. That's where I built my business. That's where my people are. That's kind of where, if I'm going to consume any social media, it's been that. And anytime I go off into the other platforms, I'm always like, and I come back to LinkedIn. I do some Facebook for family and, relatives and things like that, but mostly I'm just on LinkedIn, and it's mostly people in the contract community. But I will say I love following people who aren't in my contract world, who are, like, I don't know if you know about the Savannah Bananas, the baseball team, if you've
Oh,
ever heard of them.
yes. Mhm.
Yeah. So I heard about him way back in 2020 or 2021, and I started following him on LinkedIn and learned so much because in a way my business is very silly and ridiculous and has a lot of kind of embracing that. So it was a great model for me. But then other people, sales people, I follow recruiters in other industries, I follow copywriters, I follow anytime I'm trying to learn a new subject and get better at it. Like right now I'm trying to learn more about websites and SEO, so I'm following a whole bunch of SEO people, and not to go, to go and follow them and read their book or anything, but just kind of let their feed, flow through my LinkedIn, and I pick up a lot of tips and knowledge that way. So that's my platform.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The internet is just so damn powerful. But more than ever in the history of the world, can you learn something in 2 seconds? There is so much, there's actually more information than people can possibly fathom. But for pretty much any niche topic, just like contracts, you can find pretty much anyone that you need to learn some sort of skill or build out your skill set more than ever. I do it myself. I didn't know anything about like audio editing or anything like I just went on
Hmm.
YouTube. I was like, okay, let me go find the guy that does this. And I did. And it was a big help. And I learned that skill. So it just goes to show how powerful the internet is now. Laura, second to last question here. What does an ideal Friday night and Sunday morning look for Laura?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. A lot of it is I'm hanging out with friends and family, either playing cards, playing games. We just did a big vacation and had a family together for a week and enjoyed doing a lot of that. Or sitting with a book, watching a movie. It's more just sitting, a lot more than I used to. When I was younger, it was always going, going. And now I'm just like, I just like being on Sunday morning or Saturday night or Friday night. It's kind of the same in my world. So it's the joys of getting older. You just kind of are happier with that simpler path, especially for me, because I live such a, you know, I'd say adventurous life of living all over the world and having kids and big jobs and, accomplishing a lot. And so right now in my life, it's just nice just to kind of hang back and do the things I want to do.
Well, I have many, many adventures ahead of me, but one day I will come to the same point as you, Laura. Just be willing to relax, live that simple life. There's something beautiful about it. Now, Laura, final question here. I say this and I ask this at the end of every single episode. But Laura, what are your words of wisdom for the aspiring law students, the current law students, and the legal professionals out there in the world?
No, I think it would be try to let go of all the noise. Don't listen to the noise, whether it's noise in your head, noise from other people. There's so much out there that's telling us and bringing us down. And again, the worst perpetrator typically is ourselves. We are always self-critical. We're always judging ourselves. We're not good enough. We can't do this. We can't do that. Officially, we put on a smile and we tell everybody we can, but inside we really don't believe it. One of the big things I learned and that really helped me get past that was learning that voice in my head is just that. It's not truth. It's not reality. I had a therapist who said, when I would come up with these ideas that I'm not good enough or I can't do this or whatever, and he'd say, what facts do you have to support that? And usually I had none. It was like, I'm a terrible mother. Well, what facts do you have to support that? Your kids are great. They're happy, like you're doing a good job. And it was like, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. And so, especially being a lawyer where we're focused on facts, whenever I start going down that self-pity path or self-doubt path, I always say, what facts do I have to support that? And sure, I make mistakes. Sure, that I come up short all the time, but I realize that 95% of what swirls in my head is just my anxiety, my deep-seated fears coming up as judgment on myself and on others. And so I've learned to kind of let go of that with that question of what facts do you have?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Cliches are very silly, but when people always talk about you get angry or something. Oh, take a step back. Sometimes I literally take a step back. Literally, I take a step back. But there's so much truth to that. There's so much power to it, and it is true. You just got to take a step back, seize your judgment. Why am I thinking this way? But Laura, it was beautifully said, and it was a beautiful podcast because that is the podcast. So Laura, thank you so much for coming on here, spreading your wisdom, spreading your experiences. And for everyone out there listening, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check us out, lawyersinthemaking.substack.com, lawyersinthemaking, one word, substack.com. And I will see you all in the next one.